But Charles, let's move on then to the UK's energy security.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, and we start with the not altogether surprising announcement from the Energy Secretary that there are one or two holes in the net zero policy. An announcement yesterday saying that the strategy for gas is to take a common sense approach. And she said, this is Claire Coutinho, said that in a plan set out today, the government has committed to support the building of new gas power stations to maintain a safe and reliable energy source for days when the weather forecast doesn't power up renewables, as though the penny has just dropped. She goes on to say that this is the latest step in efforts to reach net zero in a sustainable, pragmatic way that rids the UK of the need to rely on foreign dictators like Putin. And this very much is part of the agenda. The UK led the way on banning imports of Russian gas and is delivering new sources of homegrown energy with new nuclear power plants, record investment in renewables, and new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. So let's see exactly how dependent upon that terrible dictator Putin we actually were. This is a House of Commons briefing paper, which is about the imports of fossil fuels from Russia. And we see here that in actual fact, in 2021, imports from Russia made up just 4% of the gas that we used. Notably, though, 27% of coal, which we will come back to. But nonetheless, straight away, sort of disingenuous statistics being used from the start. Rishi Sunak follows it up with an article in the Telegraph in which he also points out that renewables cannot be relied upon all the time because the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't blow all the time. So he says that this is how we will keep your lights on and your bills down. It's the insurance policy Britain needs to protect our energy security. Now, this recurring theme, while we deliver our net zero transition. And he continues, you can't protect national security without delivering energy security. The war in Ukraine reminded us all of that. A nation that is dependent on the whims of dictators for its energy supply can never be truly safe. Well, how consistent is his message? And in particular, we consider the relationship the UK either may or may not have with countries that are possibly or could be or have been declared as dictatorships by the United Kingdom. For example, we buy gas from China, Algeria. We bought gas from North Korea as recently as 2018, Nigeria, Qatar, and of course, the European Union. Even the Daily Telegraph last year, with a comment on Britain now being an elite dictatorship where majority opinions are crushed. And it's hard to disagree with the sentiment of Alistair Heath's point. Now, coming back to the security part of it, it's as though the narrative is in actual fact to push us towards the idea that everything that we do must be concerning NATO and Russia. And so we see that NATO is broadcasting a lot about energy security. This is from January, and they talk about NATO not being an energy institution, which of course it certainly isn't, but energy developments affect the international security environment and can have far-reaching security implications for the Allies. And so they go on. Here's a picture of Jens Stoltenberg last year on the coast of Norway, effectively suggesting that that NATO is sort of verging on being a protection racket where it comes to particularly gas. And Norway, again, we'll come back to. But what we'll look at now is the energy that we do actually use in the UK at the moment, and in particular how the renewable side of it works. So this is from Energy Dashboard. This is taken at 6 o'clock this morning. And on the left-hand side, you can see the red arrow pointing at 17.3% of the energy being used, being provided by gas. And notably at the bottom, 60% being provided by wind. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that's great. How admirable that wind is able to provide that. Of course, the moment the wind stops, that's 60% of energy that we need to find from somewhere else. The other part, though, that the Prime Minister and the Energy Secretary are not being entirely consistent on the right-hand graphic, is that 71% of the carbon intensity is coming from that 17%. So they've got to make their minds up as to what they really mean by all of this. For a bit more detail, we'll look at the digest of UK energy statistics, which again picks holes in their narrative. We can see the graph starts here on 1996 on the left-hand side, and effectively in both supply and demand for natural gas in the UK, there's been a steady decline since the turn of the century. So it's frankly unrepresentative to suggest that this has become a problem just now. The graph on screen now, the bottom part shows exactly how dependent we are on Norway's gas, which supplies over half of what we use, and again makes relevant Sweden's recent move into NATO. And also we see from the graph export from the UK that actually before Russia made an incursion into Ukraine back in 2021, exports of natural gas from the United Kingdom had in fact gone up quite considerably. Now, I just close out by pointing out that the National Grid has renamed itself, or is renaming itself, the National Energy System Operator. And the reason I draw your attention to that is that they have rebroadcast the government line that the UK government has set a clear deadline for coal-fired power stations to cease production by October 2024. So what are we doing to make that happen? We won't go into that now, but we will put a marker there and have a look at it back in, in the future, in October of this year, to see exactly where the government have got to with that.
You called NATO running a protection racket for, let's protect your gas pipelines. Is that what Nord Stream is about, do you think?
Well, I didn't want to expand this segment too much, but I mean, it's a very, very interesting part of it for sure. And also the other bit that I didn't really mention was that in all the sort of NATO rhetoric does go very much, with your previous segment about conscription and about this idea that we must do something to protect our own energy security, and therefore come and join the armed forces to do so.
And yes, and just finally on that then, Charles, I mean, when we look at what's going on with farming and the issue of farm security, with food security, and then we've got this issue of energy security, there doesn't seem to be a terrible momentum going on here to try to build the capacity that we need if we're going to maintain the type of population that we have on a longer term basis.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and it's been pointed out. I mean, the farming community, I think, is divided on whether or not net zero is a thing, in that whether the science behind it stacks up. And even for those that do believe that the changing climate can be driven by carbon dioxide emissions, they are still very quick to point out that in not producing foods here that are said to produce a certain amount of carbon dioxide, that still has to come from somewhere. So it's just smoke and mirrors with how you're actually purporting to be putting forward these statistics. And I mean, really, they're a nonsense, I'm afraid. But exactly as you say, nothing being done really to address the population increase and the enormous pressure on all these systems.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for that.